Commence primary ignition.
I'm just not the hero type, clearly.
What a piece of junk.
Enterprise, this is the captain.
I got a bad feeling about this.
It's all part of the plan.
Engage.
Welcome back to Podcast 2 for 1. I'm your host, Donovan Thompson, with my co-host,
Daniel Wingfield.
And today we are joined by none other than Bruce Hutchinson.
Great to be here.
Yeah. He was on a previous episode where we broke down 1917 is one of our very first ever video episodes.
And maybe the last time I thought about that movie.
Yeah, we also made Oscar predictions, and I was completely wrong about that.
We did make Oscar predictions.
I will admit that.
I feel like the Oscars was a few years ago.
A lot has changed.
A lot clearly.
Since the Oscars.
Yeah, a lot has changed.
Yes.
And now we don't even know if we're getting a new one this year.
That's true.
Yeah.
We don't have to get any more movies ever again.
I know.
True, fair enough.
But today we're back and we're talking Christopher Nolan's 2005 Batman Begins. And we not only read the script, but we rewatched the movie. And we're going to kind of break it down. And this is kind of a part of a 1 and 3 part series where we're going to break down this one, of course, The Dark Knight, and then The Dark Knight Rises afterwards. So we're kind of taking a break from news and we're kind of just hitting some cool stuff that we like to talk about, which is movies.
Good movies.
Good movies.
Yes.
So,
and hint.
First off,
this is a good movie.
It is. Hint. First off, guys, general thoughts. How do we feel about Batman Begins 15 years later?
Well, it's kind of funny because in a lot of ways it was my favorite, even though in some ways people tend to like the other ones better. When I watched it again and broke it down, I definitely saw some things that I hadn't noticed before that are maybe a little problematic that we'll get into. But it's still fun, but
No, I mean, it's funny because every time Daniel talks about liking Batman Begins more, he always brings up your name in conversation.
Yeah, because you're the only other person I know so far.
But I do too, though.
Right.
Like, I like Batman Begins. I've always said it is a better Batman movie than The Dark Knight. And I think Dark Knight's, of course, people love that movie because of Heath Ledger and just other things that it did. But I think Batman Begins I've always loved it. And I remember watching it for the first time and I was just like blown away by it. But yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, I think Batman Begins, obviously, like the Sam Raimi like Spider-Man movies had come out prior to that. I don't think 3 had, so it hadn't been ruined yet. I think 3 was like 2006.
It was 2007.
Okay, there you go. So the Sam Raimi movies were out, so I was kind of getting into superhero films, but they weren't like a phenomenon like they are now, right? And I remember watching it, and I remember like not even really hearing about it and going to it, and just being like, hey, we're going to a movie. Okay, didn't even know what it was, and getting there and watching and being like, this is amazing. Like, I've never seen Batman done like this. Like, it was just to me and someone that never read Batman comics, really my only affiliation would have been like the 90s animated cartoon. I'd seen like clips of the Jack Nicholson movie and stuff like that, but that all looked kind of cheesy to me. But yeah,
that's right. Our live episode, that was the first thing we ever saw, the 89 Batman, right?
It was, yeah.
Wow.
That's true.
Wow. Okay.
I did not grow up in a family that would have allowed me to do that at that age. But, and so I've really looked back on this movie with a lot of fondness, and even just like, even as a filmmaker, like this movie meant a lot to me, I think, in just terms of like being engaged by cinema on another level. Rewatching it, there's just so much that makes me happy as I watch this. I feel like there's just little callbacks. There's little things that are done. And I think, honestly, I would attribute most of that just to maybe Christopher Nolan's filmmaking style. And that's pretty consistent across his movies. Just there seems to be a lot of intelligence behind even the littlest decisions that he makes. I loved it again. I don't know if I loved it more or any less. It's just like one of those movies that I think I could put on at any time and love it. And
I was gonna say, the movie comparison that kind of comes up for me is Casino Royale, because the Bond franchise sort of rebooted itself in a different way than we had seen before with Casino Royale, with a new version of Bond and a grittier version of Bond.
It's a great comparison.
And then Batman Begins kind of does the same thing. I also think there's a fun comparison that maybe we can get to later, where Skyfall in a lot of ways feels like equivalent to The Dark Knight. In terms of some complexities of plot and stuff like that. And in a lot of ways is considered the better movie. But again, I would probably still say I like Casino Royale better.
I do too.
Even though Skyfall I mean, just shot fantastically, but in terms of the story and the character,
the tightness
and everything.
of, I think that with Casino Royale and Batman Begins, they're just so tight.
Yeah.
I feel like there's not fat anywhere.
One thing interesting about, not to get off on a different movie, but Casino Royale is that the guy who directed GoldenEye with Pierce Brosnan, which is so interesting because you have this like classic 90s like traditional Bond. Then you have him come in and update Bond for like, basically like a boring Bond. Right?
And wasn't the third Bond? That's the one no one likes, right?
Third Bond.
The second one was Quantum of Solace.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No one likes that one.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Including me. No
I actually I like them all, but I would put it at the bottom of the four.
I like it, but
ones,
when you come off Casino Royale, it's kind of like, ooh.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the movie itself, one thing we kind of all talked about a little bit before the podcast was the script that we read. It says written by David S. Goyer, who's accredited with Christopher Nolan in the final film. So there's a few differences, and it's more dialogue and a little, connective little things that happen a little differently, So we read that script and we watched the final product, so it'll be kind of interesting to get into too. But I mean, one thing I think that automatically sets Batman Begins apart differently from all these other superhero films is just the way kind of what Nolan's known for is his structure of out of order storytelling, right? And I don't know, what are you guys' thoughts on that? Like, I think whenever I remember watching it and even watching it now, I love it. I think it's great.
Yeah, that happens primarily in Act 1, right? And it's kind of interesting the way that's set up because, if you do break down Act 1, the way I look at it, there's sort of 4 sequences. It's a long first act. It's like
40 minutes.
40 minutes, before Wayne leaves Bhutan or wherever he is. That's in the script, by the way, but I don't think it's in the movie that he's in Bhutan.
Yeah, I was like, okay, now I know where he was.
But yeah, and so that first 10 minutes, that first sequence, basically chronological, and then it's the middle too, right? It's the second where he shows up at the League of Shadows headquarters, and then flashes back, and then we come back to the present, and he's
training.
Yeah, and then he's primed by
Ducard.
Yeah, he's called Ducard at the time. So he's primed by Ducard, and then he has the second flashback, right, which is not killing Chill, right? And so we sort of move back and forth between that. But then, after that, everything's pretty much straightforward.
One thing I have to point out, because just you mentioned Ducard. So those things, and I've watched that movie so many times. I thought his name was merely Ducard. I thought his first name was like merely, because it just sounded like merely Ducard. That sounds like a fantasy like cool guy name.
I never knew what he was saying until I read the script. By the way,
I was like, my name is merely
Ducard. I was like, okay, that's a weird thing to say.
The script, it's like,
all right.
I know. Why didn't you just say my name's Ducard? Why do you have to like emphasize that you don't have another name?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one thing you brought up about like there's the flashback where he goes back to kill Joe Chill, and in that flashback, there's this moment where he's up in the Wayne house, and he in that flashback he has a flashback of like his childhood moments with his dad, which we see a lot, which is it's so interesting of like how we're jumping back and forth, but then jumping even farther back to these different layers we're in. I just think it's great.
Works. It doesn't feel jarring. Like if you think if you put that on paper, we're gonna do a flashback and then we're gonna flashback inside the flashback. That sounds convoluted to me, but it worked. I mean, I felt like I was never confused or.
Well, and it works because when we're in his college years and we flash back to when he's a kid, we've already seen when he's a kid, right?
Yeah.
So we've already seen that footage,
right?
Right.
We've established that young Bruce.
I mean, I won't lie. When I was reading this version of the script that we had, I was like, I mean, literally, it's like almost every third of or 3/4 of a page, or whatever, or page is like a new scene with like new characters and new location, and everything else. And it feels like with the script that we have, there's just not a whole lot of. There's enough description, but not a whole lot. And part of my brain was going, I think I would have a hard time visualizing all the things that they come up with. Like, I don't know. I was having like
if you didn't have Batman Begins already in your
pretty much,
mind,
right? I was like, man, and that helped tremendously. I was like, of course I know exactly what this looks like now. But I was like, as I was reading, I was like, Jesus, this has like no really in-depth description, but it kind of can't because it's so jam-packed, so.
Well, yeah, it would be super long if it did. And also, it probably didn't need as much because he probably knew that he was writing it for Christopher Nolan. And, it's not like he had to convince people of a vision, right?
Sure. Sure. It makes sense.
He probably didn't have to pitch this. Yeah.
Well, let's kind of go through, like, you said you had the first act and 4 sequences.
Yeah.
I kind of
break down by act.
I kind of want to go through each act and kind of talk about like what Bruce Wayne is doing and kind of what he's going after and all these other characters are doing too. So I would say, would it be safe to say that Bruce Wayne's first act goal would be to find purpose almost?
I had find his path. So I think find purpose. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I'd go with that.
Yeah. Find purpose, find his path. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's dig down a little more
agree.
deeper into that though. You said you had 4 sequences. It's a little complicated because we're constantly jumping back between 3 different timelines here.
Now, Bruce, sorry, just thinking back to class, do you kind of prefer the 4-act structure typically for analyzing, or do you
I think he prefers the however many acts it needs to be structure. And
yeah, I mean, underlying my approach, because obviously I think most people and people watching this podcast are familiar with a 3-act structure, right?
Sure.
But
You better be.
For me, there's 2 things. One is units that are goal driven, right?
Right.
So it's not just an act; it's what is the goal of this amount of time, right? And then generally sort of balanced or equal length sections. So you might have 3 acts, you might have 4 acts, you might have 5 acts as the movie gets longer. You can also have sequences. In my looking at this movie, I would say that it's got acts and then it's got sequences within acts. Some movies, especially like we were mentioning Casino Royale, most of the new Bond movies are just sequences. There's no sort of larger act goals that encompass those sequences. So it just depends on the movie.
Just curious, would you say like classify a sequence in James Bond as like an action set piece? Is that how you kind
in
of
a way?
wrap
I mean,
that around?
a sequence generally is like 10 to 15 minutes, and a lot of times, yes, it is an action set piece. And then other times, of course, there's cutting back and forth between maybe dialogue with one character, and then we go to an antagonist, and maybe that's also like a 10-minute sequence.
Gotcha.
Yeah, no, I mean, just thinking about, again, another difference in the script, because I mean, the script kind of tells you what this act is about when Ducard Rizal first meets him, because and it's different than the movie, because he says, that first, I think how they do it in the movie, the scene where Ducard comes to him in prison is way better. It's way less on the nose. It's feels better. But in the script, he says, maybe you'll find what you were looking for. And Wayne says, what's that? And he says, purpose. In the movie, he says, only you can know that.
Right. Yes.
Which is much better.
Yes. I agree. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's great. Of course, I think one thing about Nolan is that granted, I don't know yet if we have the shooting script or if there's a version out there that's more complete and they were changing things on the day or whatever, they changed things in editing. I just don't know that, but there's a lot of moments like that kind of ring.
Yeah.
Like,
so let's just describe. I want to like the 4. You said how many sequences did you count 4 in this?
Yeah,
one?
I counted 4 in that first one. Yeah, so about 10 minutes each for those 4
we know
minutes.
you did more homework than we did, so let's. We all know that clearly. So let's just start breaking.
You kind of have to. You're the only one that's has a doctorate.
Sure,
so,
exactly.
So
it's just in my nature to be super prepared, right?
Exactly. So, and we're great listeners. So let's go through these.
I remember
these 4
class with you, Donovan.
These 4 sequences.
So I'll lay these out, and then you guys can tell me kind of
Wait
what you
one second.
think.
I'm sorry. I have a 4.0 GPA. Go on.
And I don't. So that's actually fair. And I'm not saying it's your fault, Bruce, but it was in your class that I got my only B. I'm just saying.
It's not all about.
I'm not sure if that's
talking.
like breaking rules about academic disclosure or nothing.
Well, to be fair, Daniel has
graduated.
Sure.
I knew that was coming.
My GPA actually means something.
Sure, gotcha.
Okay.
4 sequences.
4 sequences. And one of the things I think is going to be interesting is as we break this down, I think we're going to see that some of the rules that we get told about screenplays don't necessarily apply.
Sure.
Which is like every movie, I feel
yes,
like.
exactly.
Every movie, that.
Every movie, if you break it down, you realize all the rules you learned.
And specifically Nolan
rules.
films, he just has like this tendency to, for every movie he makes, to play with time in some way.
Right. So sequence number 1, I basically had his goal as find the League.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, it happens a couple minutes in, but, he meets Roz, and then he gets released, and then he has to hike his way up there.
Sure, the blue
and then
poppy.
he has to find the blue poppy. I mean, it's not a hard goal, but...
No.
Yeah.
Well,
but,
and really, I mean, most of that sequence is exposition, too.
Yes.
Like, we're getting his backstory alongside this more simple goal, which works, I think. You give a simple goal, and you can do some other things in that sequence.
To be fair, I think, and to kind of piggyback with that, most of the movie is exposition. I feel like we're constantly being told like new things that like in that moment that are super important. Like anyway, we'll get
Well, and these flashbacks are going to become really important for seeing an interesting way to handle exposition. Right. So 10 minutes in, he finds and he gets in. I have as his sequence 2 goal to explore his fear, because this is what at the end of that 10 minutes he goes in and it's sort of like he gives the flower, but it's sort of not automatic, right? And if I remember correctly, Ducard even says, "What's your fear?"
He says, "What is it you seek?" And he says that to make my enemies fear the same way I do, or something.
Well, in the movie, it's a little different in the script. But in the movie, he says, "What are you afraid of?" And he says, "You're not afraid of me." And he's like, and then he says, from there, basically, Bruce starts telling him like. Here's what I did, my path I took after coming back from what was the school he went to? Princeton.
Yeah.
And then, but now we're flashback from there after he basically disarms Bruce and kicks his ass and puts the blue poppy on him.
Right.
Now we're taking to this.
Yeah. So in the script, Ducard, he says, "You are afraid, but not of me." And then he says, "Tell us, Wayne, what do you fear?"
Well,
right.
That's in the movie too.
Yeah. And so then we flash back and we get all of Bruce's childhood. Right.
The great stuff with his dad, setting up like Wayne Tower, the rail system, of how it leads to how it's the heart of the city. Also just how good of a dad he is, and how people you get little nuggets like better man, more interested man. So it's like there's this legacy of like people kind of understand that Wayne is like a good person.
And that I feel like that is something I noticed more on this rewatch kind of analyzation is the constant father tie-ins to things, like just how constant his father is to the theme of the movie, and how close his relationship is to his father that mirrors like his goals of the movie are based on his father in a lot of ways.
Well, and he has 3 father figures.
He does. Yeah, Roz, his dad, and Alfred.
Yep.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
That's interesting. I didn't think about that
either.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, God, that's why I love you on this podcast.
Just choosing his father.
But then we have so after he we see him with Alfred and he's come back from Princeton, right? Of course, then we're
training.
We're training, but then we're also getting this sense of Joe Chill, and then it's kind of like the relationship of the justice system with how Joe Chill works, how Falcone works, and then also Rachel Dawes' kind of her showing Bruce how the city actually works, basically, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's the 3rd sequence.
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically.
Okay.
Yeah, because the first flashback is his parents dying.
Yes.
When he says, "What do you fear?" That's when we get.
And so we come back from that, and we have a little bit of that training montage, and we have the ice sheet fight, right?
Yes.
So this is kind of interesting because on one level, you could say like in another movie, the goal for that sequence might be to train or to like if this was the Matrix, and it would be Neo and what's his name, Morpheus, right? And Neo would have to sort of show that he could beat Morpheus.
Right.
So in this one, he's fighting Ducard. He doesn't beat Ducard, right? He thinks he has, and then we have the repetitive line of you've given up or you've lost.
Footing
you
for
don't
killing strike.
Right.
Be aware of your surroundings.
So in a sense, it would almost be like that would be a failure of a goal of the sequence. But that's really only like the last 2 minutes of that whole 10 minutes. The rest of it is the exposition.
And I feel like what's more important about that scene is the dialogue.
Yeah.
When Ducard is saying, "It was your father's fault that this happened.
Right.
It wasn't your fault. You're right. It wasn't your fault.
Right.
Your father is at fault."
Yeah.
And then that's when he like angrily attacks him.
But part of that, I would say that, but he was trying to get more of a rise out of him than actually trying to make a statement, I think.
No, I'm not thinking about Sam. I'm thinking more of like Bruce's internal journey of having to deal with his parents' death. Because I mean, it feels like he hasn't really even dealt with it.
Yeah,
basically.
of course.
Yeah, exactly. And so weirdly, like the way I have it, if the goal is to explore his fear, he is successful at that goal because he has dug in and he has shared it with Ducard. But now Ducard's pushing him even harder,
And
right?
definitely an internal goal.
Because now the next sequence and the next question is, why didn't you get revenge?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what primes the chill
next flashback.
college flashback.
Right. So yeah, just to kind of explain it, like I just did a minute ago, ahead of time. But like basically, Bruce, of course, is going to the trial of Joe Chill, and then Joe is being let off on a plea deal of some sorts. And from there, we find out kind of like Oswald style JFK that Joe Chill is being killed by says a female reporter. In the script, it's more pronounced, but in the movie, it's a female reporter also. But
you don't really see it.
You can just barely tell it's a female reporter. I had to look at it, paused it.
Right.
But basically, he misses his chance, but he planned on killing him with a gun. And then Rachel finds out about it after she drives him to the slums, and basically they have their spat. Of the big thing about that is your father would be disappointed in you.
Right.
That was like the big.
Right.
That's kind of like all leading to that moment, and then from there he decides to meet with Falcone, and we get great stuff there, which is way better than the script.
Way better in the movie.
No, way better in the movie than the script.
Falcone's Falcone's scene in the script is much more like, let's just think of a generic gangster and make him do generic gangster things.
Yeah.
And the Falcone in the movie just feels so more sinister and personal to Bruce's like own journey of how he feels about crime and how he feels about corruption.
I guess the sequence would end then with that confrontation with Rachel, then, right? Because after that, that's in the moment where we learn why he didn't kill Joe Chill.
Exactly.
And so the next sequence would be like, okay, now he's deciding to go to Falcone. So that would be like the next.
Actually, I put Falcone in that sequence too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Only because it comes right out of that, and because it's sparked by Rachel. By Rachel calling him out,
Right.
he then
and
immediately
saying your father would not. Your
right.
father
So
would be
then he
ashamed of
immediately
you.
acts on it by confronting Falcone. Because then what we see is that after that, after the end of the Falcone scene, he jumps. He comes outside. He gives his coat. Right.
Great.
And that's really the climax. Actually, I mean, as important as the scene with Rachel is,
him running away.
the
to
climax
the train.
is him giving his coat to the old man. And then seeing the ship and leaving, right? And then we come back to the present and we start the final sequence of that act, which is sort of the final test, right? To join the League of Shadows.
Which is basically a confronting your fear in the form of ninjas and also
in the form of a box of bats
and taking in this gas, right? Which plays an important part throughout the whole movie and in one form or another. And then from there, basically, defeating Ducard, showing that he's ready on a physical and like an intellectual level, and then also the big thing is we kind of confront him with the big Batman thing, which is kill this person, right? And then if you kill this person, you become League of the Shadows, and then you get to lead Gotham, which I never picked up on this. I've seen it 1,000 times, but basically they're choosing him because he's like from Gotham to go take Gotham.
He would be a great plan.
He's Gotham's favorite son.
I never either just glazed over me watching it or whatever, but I just never picked up on that.
And another big improvement of the script here would be forcing him to kill someone versus well, I think the script they just say blow out this candle and your training is complete.
No, it really personifies it by putting it in front of him. There's sort of a dual thing going on with that. It is interesting too, and it's something they probably could have developed a little bit more. Is that in understanding that we understand that Ducard / the League of Shadows, they act like they're doing, like Ducard has picked Bruce, almost like he's going to be his mentor. But really, he's picked Bruce because Bruce is convenient and can help them achieve their goals, not because. Right. And yes, maybe he sees something in Bruce and that helps, but
I didn't think about that too much. But if you think about it, all the things they need are from Wayne Industries, like the thing of course, and the rail system to Wayne Industries, and it would be much easier if Bruce was controlling everything, and they would have to do nothing hardly. It'd just be like easy. It would be easy. You're right.
Yeah.
Of course, Bruce decides to not kill the guy, and he inadvertently kills a lot of other people. Funny enough, which we don't talk about, right? As comic nerds. But he doesn't kill those guys, and he ends up saving Ducard. And then he kind of says,
"Did we miss anything?"
I think that's it. I mean,
Okay.
there's the choice he makes, right, of killing
Yeah.
this guy or not. He saves Ducard, and then he ends up, the house is
Well, we
burning
get
down.
that one more flashback. Sorry, that was one thing. His crime history flashback.
Oh yes,
Where we go
do.
through how
where he
his
learns
progression.
about the life of a criminal. That's at the
Yes.
beginning of that
Yeah.
fourth sequence.
Okay, yeah,
Yes.
that's kind of, and it's
And
true.
he says the first time I had to steal because I was starving, I
Right.
sort of dropped a lot of my assumptions about
Yeah.
criminals.
and-
And
Yeah.
I think that's great, though. I think that's great stuff, especially, of course, the fun one is I'm not a criminal, and then he's actually he's stealing from
Right,
himself, so it's
right,
kind of
right.
like, well, I'm
Sure.
really not in
Yeah.
some way, That's a little bow on it, but
That's an interesting moment too, because we pick up in the middle of that moment one of the cops or guards saying it doesn't matter what your name is. The implication being that he has said,
my name is Bruce Wayne.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, which
I
is
did
kind of
not-
weird, but it is a little weird that you'd think that he would have appealed to that, because that doesn't, it
Yeah.
runs counter to everything he's trying to accomplish in the first
That's
act.
true.
I didn't catch that.
That's
In the movie,
interesting.
I don't-
I didn't either. It may be one of those
Was
like,
it
And
like
it is in the
love
movie
kind of
too.
thing.
It's in
Yeah,
the movie and the
yeah.
script. Yeah.
I remember him saying that. I don't care what your name is. Yeah, and then it's interesting. That's weird.
Yeah.
But I would say, of course, the act fully ends there after he saves Ducard, and then he gets on the jet,
Mhm.
which we talked about a little bit earlier, Daniel. But it's a little different of how he's on the jet, and there's some
Well, we don't
exposition
get the moment
there.
where he calls Alfred. and-
Yeah, which
which
we
is
don't
so
need.
unneeded. We
Yeah,
didn't.
it's
right.
nice just to pick up on a jet, and then also a great thing. What difference in the script is that he's fixing to be declared dead, and like it's going to happen soon. But in the movie, he's already declared dead,
Right.
which
Yes.
kind of simplifies
It's
things.
yes, yeah.
Much simpler.
Yeah.
Yep.
Before we move into that, though, I do want to mention one or two things that I thought are really
Yeah.
interesting about Act One. So the first thing, we were talking about the exposition, and all the exposition that we get, when he is a kid and then when he's in college. I think what's really neat about it is that we don't just have straight up flashbacks.
Yeah.
The flashbacks are interwoven with his relationship with Ducard, right?
Yep.
And they're primed by Ducard probing these personality traits and thematic traits of Bruce's about his fear, about his guilt, about what he thinks of as justice versus revenge, right? So I think that's really cool. I think that's a great way to handle all of that exposition, rather than just throwing it as a flashback, or even starting with it, is to intertwine it with this guy who's doing the psychological probing of Bruce,
It
right?
makes sense because it makes huge sense. And also, one cool thing is, again, those little bitty baby inserts of like just a shot or two of like him and his dad, and those are just so they're just beautifully shot, of course, but then B, it's just like he's those little like 8-second moments, which Nolan does a lot in his movies.
Mhm.
They just reinforce so much, like constantly throughout the movie, of what he's constantly thinking.
Right.
It's
Right.
just
Yeah.
good, good little
And
things.
they're powerful. Yeah. Thinking about it as a whole, like thinking about everything you just said about Act One, Bruce, it makes me feel like this is maybe one of the best like expositions to a character, like how like a origin story. What are you going to do with the first act?
Right.
Can you do better than this?
Yeah, it's really well done.
Yeah.
I agree.
And it's of course enhanced by the music, the acting, and the
The
cinematography.
gorgeous locations
Yeah,
with those really
right.
interesting like ice things.
I mean, it
and-
really
yeah.
doesn't feel like a super. At that point, if you're watching that, you would. If someone told you it was Batman, you probably wouldn't know it was Batman. You know what I'm saying? Like
Without the names, yeah.
From what we understand, and it just like has this epic feel to it. These big vista shots, and you got to think. I think it's like 7-8 years beforehand we had Batman and Robin.
Right.
It wasn't that
Right.
long
Yeah.
beforehand. We had fighting Arnold.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, we'll dig into it as we get later, and it is beginning to set up the world of the next two movies. That is a much more realistic
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of mise en scène and portrayal. But I'll also say that the first act, I think, has what sets up what I think is the biggest problem with this movie,
Sure.
which is
It's bro anymore.
well, yes, exactly. The themes, the movie, all three movies want to be very heavy with their
They
themes
do.
and very important with their themes. And I always, all three of them, I think, have mixed success with that.
Agreed.
With
Yep.
this movie, there's, I think, a couple of possible themes that get set up. One of the big ones is overcoming fear,
course.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But normally you want that to be something that the character sort of has to do near the end of the movie. But
Sure.
when he finds the Batcave and he stands up when all the bats fly out,
Yeah.
he has already overcome his fear, right?
Right.
And even when
And
he...
I feel like it's even implied by end of Act One. He's
Yes,
overcome it.
yeah.
I feel like.
and we'll get to the final act, but when he has his final battle with Roz, there's nothing that he seems particularly afraid of, right? So another possible theme is he going to choose justice or revenge, right? That could be something that he wavers between in defining this role of Batman. But again, he doesn't, right? He clearly chooses justice over revenge. Right. And when Rachel tells him that, that's the choice he's made, and he never wavers from that again. Yeah. And then we've got one more possible theme, which is the one that kind of gets brought up a little at the end, and that's why do we fall? Right. That was what I was thinking. So that we can stand back up. And that does happen late in the movie, but it happens and for 5 seconds, right? Yeah. And he's like, "Oh, I failed," and then Alfred says, "Oh, well, why do we fall to get back?" And then that's it.
But there's something also about the dad though too. And granted, the why do we fall there's too, but I feel like in the last scene, he's closing up that manhole or the whatever the well is, whatever it is. Yeah. I feel like there's something else there too about making his dad proud, because he says, "I'm going to build the house brick by brick," which means like he's not upset, like he's accepting of his legacy now as being a Wayne.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Well, that's kind of the one and I agree with you 100%. I feel like that's the only one I can see that kind of lingers past to the end.
It does. I mean, the dad theme, and even what happens right before, like when he's kicking all these party guests, he's told the apple has fallen very far from the tree.
I want to talk about that scene. That scene bothers me a lot, actually, but we'll get there.
Well, one thing, kind of picking back off of what, the last scene there, when he first arrives at Wayne Manor as an adult in the flashback, he says, "Alfred, I'd pull this whole thing down brick by brick."
Right.
And again, it's kind of like he's rejecting. He's like so upset about his parents' death is that he's rejecting trying to get close to them again.
Yeah.
And by the time the movie ends up, even though again I agree, that's one thing I want to talk to you about today. About it's like I'm going to hold it for the podcast. Is basically he solves everything by the middle of the movie almost, or
right.
third into the movie. And it's kind of weaker. It becomes more of a movie at that point where we're just trying to do plot and we're trying to accomplish goals and save Gotham, right?
But to be fair, it works. I mean, and maybe that's just part of the genre that it's in.
But there's a world in which I don't know. I mean, I love it so much, but there's a world in which that first act is spread throughout the whole movie. I don't know.
Yes, I agree.
But I'll just say counterpoint to that. I feel like that's what Man of Steel tried to do specifically, and I don't think it worked at all. How they tried. I feel like that was a failure of how that felt to me.
Sure.
So I hear you, but
yeah, I would agree completely with you on the family issue, and I would call that motivation, right? That's his motivation for what he's doing. And there is a change in his, but I think one of the things that we tend to want to see with characters, especially with that more internal thing, is somehow a link between the internal goal and the external goal, right? Yeah. And the issue of accepting the Wayne legacy and his family doesn't really factor into his ability to beat Ra's al Ghul at the end, or be Batman, right? Those are kind of separate things, and again, I'm sort of talking about traditional structure, so it's not like you have to do it that way, but there's a reason why we do them that way, and it's because I think generally it's a little more fulfilling to see a character figure something out inside, and then that helps them overcome the external obstacle. But that doesn't really happen here, right?
And
that acceptance of the Wayne legacy is more just another subplot. And it's a good subplot. I think it's well done, but it doesn't necessarily impact the main external goal.
Right. And I'm trying to think, is there a climax to that subplot? Is there a moment when he accepts it? Because
accepts, the Wayne legacy?
Like when he's like, okay, I'm going to accept this now.
I think it's at the end when he says he's going to rebuild.
I think,
but I felt like that was maybe. I mean, it feels like he's kind of already accepting it when he comes back to Gotham, and he's. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like I don't think so. I mean, if he has, he's never expressed until that moment. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Because there's, we'll get into it.
And that's where some of the other issues of what the Wayne legacy and the Wayne name mean, I think, gets a little tricky in the movie. Yeah.
Okay, so we started
Act 2.
We're back Act 2.
Oh, wait,
right?
have you given all your Act 1?
Yeah. Okay. Let's move forward.
So Act 2, where are we at on time?
Yeah, we're
30 minutes.
We don't even care.
That's fine. Act 2. So basically, now we're in the mission of I'm going to try to become Batman or figure out what Batman is, I guess,
Right.
or what's the symbol I'm going to be? Because he even says in the plane ride, you know, you got to give them something that you can't be flesh and blood. You have to be like a man or something
Right.
more than a man, right? And
Well, I mean, it sounds like these kind of break down into more sequences. It's kind of smaller goals of his steps to becoming Batman, right? I mean, he needs to find the symbol. He finds the symbol. He needs to assemble the equipment, and that's several montages. He needs to start figuring out who the good people in the city are, and all these kinds of like small steps that will allow him to do what he wants.
Yeah, but he's kind of doing all these things and like it's kind of
They bounce around.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's and I would say that there's a little less structure here, but that's not a bad thing at all. But in terms of like really just trying to label things, I said the Act 2 goal was to stop Falcone or to get Falcone, right? And then I broke that into 2 sequences. So the first one was to create the Batman, right? And most of the early scenes, basically, like after he gets back to Gotham, the next 10 minutes, 12 minutes or so are all the things you're talking about. Finding the cave, talking to Lucius Fox, finding out about the armor, these different things that he gets set up. And then I kind of see that, and it's not a very strong climax, but there is a moment where he goes out as Batman for the first time, but he doesn't have the full costume, right?
And the Now or Two moment.
He's got the spelunking gear, right? Yeah, but he's also just wearing a ski mask,
right?
Yes. And then the second sequence for me is the actual arresting of Falcone, like, right? So then there's this whole thing where Falcone's doing the drugs and he's found out, he's asked, why hasn't anyone tried to get him? So he goes out there, he does all that stuff, and we get a pretty strong climac, where he's standing on the building and we get the first iconic view with the cape in the wind and all this kind of stuff. And
that definitely has a very
the script,
strong
and the movie
climax.
handles them all of this much better than the script did. Like even Falcone, like how like in the movie he pulls him out of the thing and I'm Batman, and then there's little changes that make them. Of course, we're talking about this and you have no idea what we're talking about yet for the script probably.
Which you should. Maybe we'll email it to you.
In the
Email
script, they have the judge there.
That's right.
And then they have Falcone, and in the movie they sort of merge that all into one thing, and what's happening with the judge is actually Falcone being pulled out of the car.
Right.
And it's more streamlined and works better.
The judge thing happens first, right? Like, isn't that happening like outside of Falcone's bar?
I think
that's from what I was reading in the script, because in the script I think it doesn't that sequence start with Falcone in the bar with the judge and he leaves, and that they have that moment where he's like just surrounded by hookers and being fat.
I think you're thinking at the end of whenever Bruce leaves.
Yeah, you're right.
We don't really get much with the judge.
No, because the last time we see him is
the
whenever
movie.
Bruce is getting kicked out of the bar after in the flashback. There's a look at the judge, and then he's kind of like, "Look, the
that's
judge,
right. That's the shot I'm thinking about.
That's the last shot I think we see of him prominent. But during this, one other thing that's kind of brought up, of course, is this idea of the Wayne Enterprises is going public, and his name is what, Earl? Is that his name?
Yeah, Earl. Yeah.
Which is funny. It's Rutger Hauer, which is, of course, Blade Runner's Christopher Nolan's. He says it's his favorite movie of all time, one of them, right? And it's like a huge win for him, I would assume. Kid's like probably one of the favorite actors.
And Rutger Hauer just passed away pretty recently.
He's amazing, and he's in so many good things.
Yeah.
But so you have him, and then you also have this dynamic of Lucius Fox giving the weapons to Bruce. And
it's another subplot, kind of his taking back the family company. Yeah. Or starting to. Yeah.
And it's a fun and enjoyable subplot. Actually, I think it's done really well.
I do too. And way Morgan Freeman delivers his lines. It's just so nice, and like it just has this twinkle in his eye kind of thing.
The moment when he reintroduces himself to the board is so good. Again, better than they did it in the script too, where he just walks out and he's sitting there.
Well, even how Bruce arrives in the script, it's like there's two different moments, but they kind of merge it where he's golfing outside, and he goes outside, and of course it makes it's more streamlined, right? He finds that he's being a womanizer, but he's also come back, and that's all good stuff. But it seems like there's moments I felt like honestly that Earl was kind of happy that Bruce was back, kind of in the movie, but then in the script it really feels like he's just never happy that he's there. Of course, I think at the end of the day, of course he doesn't want Bruce there at all, but it just kind of
he doesn't mind if he's there. He just doesn't want him.
Sure, but I think in the movie he seems a little softer than he does in the script. a little bit till the end, until he's an asshole to Lucius.
He's not super dislikable, honestly, in the movie. I mean, you're right. He's a jerk to Lucius. And then I think the other big thing that we realize is he tries to cover up the theft of the microwave emitter, rather than handling it more professionally, right?
He's just a capitalist executive at a big company. Like you're in every way, and everything that kind of person is.
But there's nothing necessarily inherently problematic with him taking the company public.
No,
the movie doesn't set that up as some horrible thing.
Right, and in this one, it's like, no, we got to do it before his 30th birthday.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that just.
Yeah, no, it feels much more natural, and also, again, you're right, it doesn't come across as evil, I guess.
Yeah, like it just feels like a little mustache twirly.
Yeah,
when he's like,
well, just the birthday thing adds an extra, like the time limit on the birthday thing adds an extra layer that kind of complexes things when already we're dealing with a lot of complex.
But in the end, it doesn't matter. Like even in the script, like he has that time limit. I don't ever feel like that time limit motivates any of his actions.
It doesn't.
No,
That's probably why they took it out. But yeah, so Act 2, Bruce, we kind of end with the I'm Batman moment, and Falcone has now been strung up onto like a makeshift bat signal, I should say. And then, let me back up. There's one cool thing that I noticed whenever, I talked to you about this earlier, but whenever Gordon gets the jacket and puts it on Bruce in the script, on young Bruce, in the script, it's like the commissioner, the lieutenant, whatever, he's kind of like, you're always sticking your nose into stuff, Gordon, and get out of here.
Right.
But in the movie, he does it, and then he turns around and sees the lieutenant, and there's this kind of look from him, and then he leaves. And it's one thing that I never would have picked up on ever, probably, but then in the script, it kind of shadowed, oh, this is actually what's happening here. Gordon is kind of this low-level cop, and he's actually...
Right. I remember getting it, but it wasn't that. It wasn't like, you asked. It was just like, he felt like annoyed. I just felt tension. But in the script, it's definitely like, okay, whoa, there's a kid sitting here that just lost his parents. Do you need to be an asshole in front of him?
Well, I don't think it's being an asshole. I'm talking
in the script.
You're talking about Gordon?
No, the Commissioner Loeb.
Yeah, well, I'm saying, but I'm saying like it definitely kind of in the script made it more prominent that Gordon is kind of like the outlier in that moment. Like he's the one going out, and like, A, he's nicer than all the other cops, and B, he's one kind of willing to break the rules. Yeah. But we got it in a great. I'm getting sidetracked, but I just want to talk about that little change there. Just makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Well, in Act 2, I think it's worth noting. Well, Act 2 is really when we start introducing major side characters
like Gordon
and their plots,
and Rachel
and Gordon, basically,
and then also Rachel's kind of like, I don't know, the DA. Is it the DA?
Is it
the DA?
Yeah.
Okay. They even name drop Harvey Dent at one point.
I noticed
but
that.
What's his profession at that point? He's not the DA, is he?
Because I think he gets like promoted to the DA or Dark Knight.
Yeah, he gets promoted.
I think he's just maybe another prosecutor in the office.
Yeah. Okay, gotcha. But yeah, so he gets kidnapped. Well, that's way later. Never mind. I'm jumping. That's your micro transmitter part of stuff. Anyway, so end of Act 2 is I'm Batman, and what's the beginning of Act 3, Bruce?
Yeah, so by the way, I mean, I said that the Act 2 goal was to arrest Falcone, but it could also be to become Batman, right?
Yeah,
because at the end,
I think
exactly.
And I feel like at the end, yes, we see him go out when he goes and sees Gordon, but we're like, he's kind of half-baked Batman.
Right.
And I do feel like that moment, I'm Batman. And it's also him just announcing himself to the world.
Yeah.
Like no one has ever used that word before until he says it.
Yeah.
It's true.
So one of the things that we started to see that I think is kind of interesting about this movie is that I think it has a little more of a video game structure than you might have realized at first, because when you think about it, it's Falcone, and then it's Scarecrow / Crane, and then it's Ra's al Ghul, right?
He's got multiple villains.
And each act, he has to go up the ladder, until he has the boss battle at the end, So there is a bit of a video game structure to that. Exactly. So especially in Act 2 and in the second sequence of Act 2, Crane has been introduced,
right?
And we've set up this plot line of the drugs. Only half the drugs are going to Falcone. Where are the other half going?
And I think I was just a side. I think there's a brilliant at the very end of Act 2. We have that conversation between Falcone and Crane when he's saying like you've been skimming off the top, and he's not going to be happy.
For
one, it automatically shows that Crane is above Falcone.
Right.
So we've just learned that Falcone doesn't fuck with Crane, and especially whoever else is coming. And then, of course, it also sets up the big bad. at the end. And so you get that right at the end of Act 2. So then he takes out Falcone, but we're already put on the trail of what's next.
Yeah.
And I think that was
and that
done
gets
well.
developed early in Act 3 because the Crane goes to see Falcone in jail, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then does the scarecrow thing to him,
Yeah.
right? So for me, then the Act 3 goal is to stop Crane, basically, to stop Scarecrow.
Yeah.
Right?
Is there a moment in the script where he's like, I've got to go stop Crane, or is it just kind of like
No,
happens?
it's much more fluid,
Yeah.
you know?
Because
and
he's looking for the bunny thing, and then he ended up finding Crane through the bunny.
Right.
He finds
Right.
Crane on accident. Like he's really just looking for. He's just trying to figure out what else is in the drugs. Because he goes to Flass. He
Right.
has the swear to me moment.
Right.
And then he ends that with there's something else in the drugs.
Right.
Yeah.
But like any goal, the goal doesn't necessarily, a lot of times goals are established right at the beginning of a section, but they don't have to be, right?
Yeah.
And, and so again, we also have sequence level goals. So for me, there's 3 sequences in this act. So the first sequence goal is to just discover where the other drugs are going, right? What's going on what is that? What's happening with them? Where are they going? Then his second goal, or second sequence goal of that, so this is sequence 8, by the way, the movie, is to actually defeat Crane,
Sure.
right? Which he does.
Is the end of sequence 1 where he gets gassed?
Or when
Would that
Batman
be-
Yes, when he
escapes
gets when he
Rachel?
gets gassed and
Yeah.
set on fire, I would say is the climax of
okay.
the 7th
Sequence 1.
sequence,
Gotcha,
right?
gotcha.
Then the 8th sequence, basically he recovers the next morning,
Sure.
and I do want to talk about that after we sort of
Technically
set this
2
up.
days later.
Oh,
Because
right,
Alfred
2
says
days
you've
later,
been
yeah.
sleeping for 2 days.
Right, and now it's his
Yeah, it's
birthday.
his birthday.
Rachel comes to his house and basically says, "I have to go talk to Crane," and then he immediately wants to go, but he's got to
Party.
He's got
Entertain his guests.
party
Yeah.
first, right?
And there's also one thing that you bring that moment up. There's this arrowhead that's kind of brought throughout the movie. It
Yes.
brings up 3 times in the beginning when they find
Yeah.
it, when she gets to the birthday, and of
Right.
course, I think it's it. Is there one at the end too? I think that's it.
He doesn't give it back, I don't think.
Yeah, I think that's it. I
I
think.
don't remember. Yeah.
Yeah, but what is it? Just like it's just like a throwaway talisman that kind of represents their friendship or their childhood, and or is there something more to that? Like, is there? What do you guys think?
I think it's probably just a towel. I mean, it's a nice small detail that just adds a little more substance to the relationship, or I feel like it gives like a physical like identifier for their long-standing friendship kind of thing. But beyond that, I mean Rachel and his relationship, she definitely motivates him
Yeah.
in certain ways, but at the same time, I don't necessarily feel like she motivates him, because even like the times when she's kind of telling him off or lecturing him, he's just pretending usually. Like he's not even wanting to be this playboy. This is like after that conversation with Alfred where he's like, what do playboys do? Like,
Yeah.
well, buy some stuff or whatever.
Yeah.
So I feel like even though Rachel's like kind of preachy moments are thematic, I feel like Bruce already knows what she's telling him too.
Yeah.
Even how he says, well, listen, I'm not this guy. I'm not what you see here isn't me.
I feel like the Rachel subplot is underdeveloped. The arrowhead and the finders keepers doesn't for me do a whole lot, and it's unfortunate because she is the one who pushes him on the right road, and that part is really strong
In the
and powerful.
flashbacks.
Yeah.
for sure.
it is.
For
Sure.
sure.
But at the end, there's this sense of like, I'll give up being Batman for you, and
True, yeah.
she's like, yeah, whatever. But you never really get a strong sense of their love in the same way that you do in The Dark Knight.
I think
Right.
The Dark Knight is where all that
The
kind of
love
pays
story
off.
is much stronger in The Dark Knight.
Yeah.
Here, you never really get a strong sense of it. Although I really do love the moment when he reveals to her that,
It's a great moment.
when he says that line
on the
about
rooftop
what's
at the
on,
end.
on the
Oh,
inside.
it's great.
Yeah.
But no, I agree. I mean,
Yeah.
there's not really a romance subplot.
yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call
it isn't developed as
It's more
much
of
as
like
it could
just
be.
a relationship subplot. Her relationship with him, how he feels about each other.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
interesting.
yeah, so to go back to the structure then, so he gets set on fire. That's the end of sequence 7. His new goal is to defeat Crane, which he sort of finds out through Rachel's going to go.
Yeah.
And so then he goes, he does defeat Crane relatively easily, actually.
Yeah.
And then
To be fair, he got beat by Crane, so he learned his lesson.
right.
Right. Crane got him.
And then
first.
sequence 9 is to save Rachel.
Yeah, which is the great.
So Rachel's
Tumblr
kind of
scene.
laying there, but really saving Rachel is primarily getting her out, and then the chase with the
car chase.
police, and then getting back to the Batcave
Right.
and giving her the antibody, right?
Yeah.
Or the whatever.
Yeah,
it is.
you're right. Yeah.
The antidote. I mean,
Yeah.
And then there's that's the end. You say of Act 3, I'd say, or
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd call that the end of it.
Yeah, I think that's
so. Then I guess the beginning of Act 4 would be. She's woken up, and then also we're going to the
goal of Act 4 would be to save Gotham, right? They know there's a poison in the well by the end of Act 3 because the police have discovered it. He has, Lucius has developed an antidote, but they need to mass produce it and all these kinds of things. Basically, just we know Gotham's under attack. We have to save it.
Yeah.
And then what's Gordon, other than like he helps her out, what's Gordon doing until he says go find Gordon? Is he say just wait for me, or you know what I'm saying? Like, what does Gordon do?
Yeah,
until
well, they
she
had that
comes, gets him?
conversation on the rooftop of Arkham Asylum before Batman drops down the swirly bat thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He's
yeah.
like he's just Gordon in that moment to get outside so he can.
Well, this actually points to a bit of a weakness in the story. So, by the way, we were describing it a little incorrectly when Rachel comes to see him for his birthday, and then he goes to follow. He actually follows her immediately. It's not till after he comes back and saves Rachel, then he has to go to the party.
Right.
Right. And then Ra's al Ghul shows up at the party.
I think what I was thinking was because Alfred mentions to them when he's about to go after Rachel, "What, you have guests arriving this long?" And he's like, "Tell him that joke, Right.
And we can talk about that. But yeah, I think one of the weaknesses, I mean, it's just a little plot thing, but if Ra's al Ghul doesn't show up at his party, what is Bruce doing next?
Yeah.
And I think that points to what is Commissioner Gordon doing next. I mean, they know that the emitter
was stolen.
It was stolen, and it's there, and there might be stuff in the water supply. So I guess Commissioner Gordon is trying to figure that out.
Actually, the last thing he says, I think, is I got to go contact the water or something. He says that. I think it's the last thing he says before.
Right.
I got to get me one of those.
Well, and I guess, but even kind of even outside of Ra's al Ghul being in, it's confusing because it happens like while he's talking. He's like, we've infiltrated every level, and then you see like half the SWAT are his guys,
right? And
then they turn on the machine and all this stuff. So even if Ra's hadn't been there, that stuff would have happened. Now, could Bruce have had any idea and gotten to it in time? And like,
well, but when we get to the beginning of that act, what we know, or what Bruce knows at least, what Bruce knows is Crane had this emitter. He's put a bunch of stuff in the water, and he knows that the emitter can weaponize the stuff, right?
Yes.
But as far as he knows, all the bad guys are gone. Now it's been mentioned to him at least once, if I think correctly, that Ra's al Ghul is alive, and he says no, Ra's al Ghul is dead
when he interrogates Crane after spraying him.
But to the best of his knowledge, I guess what I'm saying is there's kind of nothing left for him to do. I mean, he can try to turn off the emitter or whatever.
I would think he at least assumes there's some bad guys out there still, obviously.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, my thought is he can't think that it's
Right.
over. Like it's hard for me to be like, oh, I did it.
Well, then you kind of ask yourself, well, why doesn't he, instead of going to a party, why doesn't he immediately go try to stop the water supply or something like that? You know, like of course, he's forced to the party.
Obviously, it's not, whatever the situation he believes is happening isn't serious enough to
it's not Batman
skirt his social obligations.
Yeah,
sure.
But it's not a huge deal. And again, the so you've got that sequence where he's got to, actually the whole sequence, he's got to fulfill the Wayne name by going to the party, but then Ra's al Ghul shows up. We have the big battle. Climax is he falls down the elevator, says, I failed. Why did I do any of this stuff?
Yeah.
Right. Alfred tells him,
why do we
I still believe in you. He's like, oh, you're never going to give up on me. And of course, he's going to say, never.
Yeah. Right? I love it. I love in the script it says conviction. Like he says it with conviction. Yeah. And of course,
I wish they had spelled it like he says it though. N-E-V-A.
And then Michael Caine, of course, nails it. But there's some other good nuggets there with like Ra's al Ghul and the house there when it's burning. You burn my house down, left me for dead. So I'm doing that. And there's this camaraderie there. Like, you're my best student. And even
he gives him another chance.
He does. Like, hey, we'll let you do this still.
Yeah.
And it gives him like a more nuanced villain. Like, he's not, he's got noble intention, but he's just going about it a really dark
He's
way.
honestly a kind of likable villain. Like
very
he's kind of the
charming.
villain. You're like, I wish you were a good guy so you could just train all the good guys. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Like I always liked Ra's al Ghul. Just I think I just like Liam Neeson. A big part of it.
Yeah, no, Liam Neeson is a big part of it. And it's interesting, he's not the first, he's not that dissimilar from our Avengers, what's his name? Bad guy.
Loki.
No, the
Thanos?
main
Oh,
Thanos.
Thanos.
The
Oh,
sense
right.
of
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
he's got
going to
nuance.
destroy this corrupt thing or this thing that's not working properly, and we're going to reset.
for a theoretical
Right.
good purpose.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sure some
Um,
would agree with Ra's al
right.
Ghul. So.
I'm
sure
But,
they-
Yeah.
but in the end, Roz is he's a fascist, right? I
Yes.
mean, he thinks that that freedom should be taken away in order to get rid of crime.
But there's also something in the script. He keeps mentioning solitude in the script over and over again. Like, we need to be in solitude. Do you see us up here in these mountains in solitude? Like, that is how men should be. And
But I
like,
think solitude and peace is, and then I think if peace is ultimate goal, then solitude and justice, or I don't know. I feel like that's
because it feels like almost in the script, it feels like he's like anti-metropolitan. Like,
Right.
like the problem with America is that there's cities. If we just had a bunch of farms, we'd be fine.
Right.
sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
No, I mean, it's a point to make. I'm trying to think. So we have the birthday party scene, of course, and he falls down. He goes down the shaft.
Another, harking back to that theme of fulfilling the Wayne,
Oh,
if that is a theme, we
yeah.
have that moment with Alfred. Well, if for one, we have the moment with Alfred where he's kind of disappointed in him, like treating his guests that way.
That I have a problem with.
Well, that's what I'm bringing up next.
But then the other guy that says the apple has fallen very far from the
Yeah.
tree.
Yeah, but he's doing it for a noble conviction. I mean, like, the thing is, he's painting his legacy in a negative way, but as the audience, we know he's doing it for a good reason,
Yeah.
So
Which is setting up Dark Knight.
I also don't understand how Alfred can lecture him on setting an example of the Wayne name when it was Alfred's idea for Bruce to be a playboy.
Yeah.
that's true.
After he takes the end, it was like, what do I do? And it's Alfred who tells him all the crazy stuff that he needs to do to justify his injuries.
You're right,
and
yeah.
it's and
Yeah,
Yeah. And it also just
Get it
feels
from all
like
sides, Bruce.
it's the one moment where it's like, don't you understand he's Batman now?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you, if he really thinks he has to do this, doesn't he probably have a good reason at this point? I don't know. I feel like Alfred.
I think there is another possibility here. It's just that it's not well executed. I think there is a subtext to Alfred getting upset, which is that Alfred is actually upset about Bruce risking his life as Batman.
Yeah.
And there is some reference to that. And when he does the whole chase with Rachel and he's giving him a hard time for all of that, for risking his life, and he's like, Rachel was dying, and Alfred doesn't seem to really care that Rachel is dying. And I think partly what we're supposed to pick up on is
His
that
son.
Alfred is getting worried about the commitment that Bruce is showing to being Batman. And so I think in that moment when Bruce is like, I got to go do this stuff, and he's like, no, you got to stay at this party. Part of it is like, if you stay at this party, you'll be safe. But I just don't think the movie quite develops
Sure.
it well enough
I
for the
think-
audience to really understand that might be what's going on with Alfred.
That's it's a common comic thread that's always being pulled, but I think that specific thing in the movies is really addressed in The Dark Knight Rises, right?
Mhm.
Where
Sure.
we'll get to that later,
Yes.
but
I think
that's where that really kind of pays off.
But if they had leaned, that could have been another kind of interesting thread to have, because Alfred is, especially in like that, like Alfred's helping him do everything, like very closely
there's-
with him, everything.
In the comics, there's always this push and pull of Alfred. His like psychology is that I want Bruce to stop being Batman, but I feel like he has a better chance of survival if I help him do what he's doing. He's going to do it no matter what. Might as well help him live. Who's going to patch him up? So there's that weird like two-face, like double-sided coin there, you know. So like it's like damn if I do, damn if I don't, sort of thing.
Well, and that could be a really fascinating part of Alfred's personality, and it does play out better in later movies. Although even then, it feels a little forced in Dark Knight Rises. But we'll get there.
I agree.
It does.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah.
Not gonna mention that last final scene.
Spoilers. I like it.
Okay, fine.
But so then we end, of course. Was it Act 5? Then we're starting, I guess.
No, and that's it. So two sequences in Act 4.
Okay.
First sequence is the party, and then
Gotcha,
the climax of Alfred having to rescue him and going down in the elevator. And then the second sequence is stopping Roz.
Would that be the climax? Would the climax be Raj defeating him? kind of.
Well, it's a climax and resolution,
Yeah, sure. Okay, fair enough.
The climax is the big fight with Roz. That's the big action set, in the climax. But the act ends with
the only reason I was saying that
Alfred picking him back up, and then we're going to start the final sequence. I said act, but that ends sequence 10. Sequence 11 then starts with
the final battle.
The final battle, and off he goes to try to stop.
Which in the
Roz.
script we have this Rachel is saving this little boy who's Joffrey from Game of Thrones, which is not in the not in the script, it's in the film. Yeah. And then we have Gordon, who is controlling the tumbler to destroy the rail system.
Which in the script he just hits the train with his car at one point, like to stop them, or like I guess it forces them onto a different track.
So and it is handled better in the movie. In the script, Gordon is just driving his own sedan,
right?
And there are trucks of henchmen shooting at the train and at Bruce from the road.
That's right.
And he hits the truck with his car and keeps them from shooting.
Gotcha.
He doesn't have much of a part, so by putting Gordon in the tumbler, the movie obviously gives him a stronger role to play in helping Bruce.
It just starts solidifying that Gordon Batman relationship, which I think was really good.
Yeah, they're partners at the end of the day. One thing I kind of want to talk about is in the script, whenever there's the final moments between Roz and Batman, in the script he says, "Are you afraid of me?" Or he says, "Are you afraid?" And he says, "Not of you." Mm-hmm. And that's how he
flipping the line.
Yeah, flipping the line, which we had earlier. And then he ejects himself from the train, and then Roz goes down with the ship. Right in the movie, he says, it kind of calling back on the mind your surroundings. Like, hey, I'm not. Who says we're stopping this train? Meaning we're going to actually impale it. And then he has the line, I'm not. I don't have to.
He says, I thought you wouldn't kill. He basically references his line about not killing. Raish brings it up, and then he says, I'm not going to kill you, but I don't have to save you
either. Yeah. Which kind of like,
I know you have a big problem with as a Batman.
As a Batman fan, but even like thematically, I think like there's this thing he doesn't kill people, but you could argue he kills Ra's al Ghul that moment. Yeah. I mean, we had this conversation about who is heroic, or is he less heroic for it, or what's her heroism? At least as a Batman standard, but I don't know. Is it problematic at all? I mean, of course, I love it. I'm okay with it at the end of the day, but I really dive into it. I think is it kind of negating some of the things he does by not saving Roz, because he's choosing. I mean, he's kind of going on the path down. He's killing someone for the greater good. Yeah,
Well, yeah, and I mean, I was never one of those like super comic book in terms of like. Does he have too many guns on the Batmobile? Like, I just never worried about that. You could make an argument that he would be risking his own life to try to save Roz. I mean, he does have to like whatever. I mean, is his cape or his whatever he does when he flies out the back of the train, is that going to support two people?
Right.
And we can make the argument. He certainly doesn't have an obligation to risk his life to save Roz.
How many times are you supposed to save a guy's life? You already did it once. I mean, come on. Roz hasn't even paid him back for that one. So
I just didn't know if it was just kind of bringing up some issues of like what the moral of like, kind of negating the things that choices he makes in the first act or not. I didn't know if it kind of.
I don't feel like it does personally.
It's a movie, so
the other way I see it too is that even in the moment where he's given the sword to kill, I think it's the farmer in when he's with the League of Shadows, he is instructed to deal out death as justice. With Raish, he's just letting him go to the end of his own choices. He's not sitting in a place of judgment saying, you know what, you fucked up, so I'm going to fuck you up. It's that Raish has started this train and he's trying to destroy things. And he's like, you know what, I'm not going to try to prevent this from happening.
The movie has also set up the dichotomy between justice and revenge.
Yes.
And he's not getting revenge on Roz by letting him die, right? Because Roz hasn't actually done anything to Bruce and specifically personally, right? So I think that's another way where maybe the movie gets with it.
He burnt his house down,
which let him build a bigger Batcave. It was a help out. He was helping him out. I thought you might want to.
But you know what I'm saying? Like, because the movie sets up that as the dichotomy by choosing to let him die, he's not choosing revenge, right? So he hasn't.
Yeah,
it kind of saves him from making sort of the opposite choice that he's supposed to.
Yeah, that's interesting because I feel like, obviously just knowing Batman, I know the whole no kill rule, But this movie has it focuses really on revenge rather than killing. Like it's because even I feel like I'm trying to remember the farmer the scene. He makes a comment about like this isn't justice. Because he's mirroring that line that Rachel and him have in the car, and he's like, "I wanted." He's like, "That's not revenge. That's justice."
Yeah.
Whatever. So there's interesting things.
To be fair, every single Batman movie that exists, he has killed people in it. Maybe not the Adam West one from '66, but
but at the same time, you could find some instances.
I mean, Michael Keaton smiled and laughed as people literally got detonated in Batman Returns. He kicked them off with dynamite. I mean, that's but I mean, technically,
but those movies didn't even try to address that part of Batman.
Sure,
so
sure, but that's what I'm saying. Like, and also, and there's even the thing about him, doing the fire poker. And then Ra's al Ghul dies a minute later because of the fire burning on the building, and it kills him in the knockout. And who knows how many ninjas burned up in that fire? And I mean, that's
everyone knows ninjas don't count.
Yeah, but that's that's a lot of people dying that he directly was involved.
Well,
in.
and when he's driving Rachel back, the number of police cars that just go flying and crashing into things.
As I was watching, I was like, I literally was like, I can justify this. As I'm watching it, I was thinking it in my head.
You like what? Oh, that's survivable. Yeah, no, he goes about that. Nope, with airbags and airbags are working. That's fine.
You don't
He's
see
okay.
bodies. But anyway, I was more concerned not on a comic level because it's a movie, it's a different medium, but more of like, is it kind of negate some of the things we learned as a character on the way? Yeah, so the movie,
of course, the prologue.
Yeah, the prologue here, right? We have, Gordon.
Epilogue, by the way.
Oh, sorry.
Epilogue,
sorry.
there you go.
Whatever.
We have Gordon revealing or not, I guess that's at the end. We have Batman going back to Wayne Manor, and they're kind of picking to the rubble.
Right,
Thank you.
Actually, the first thing that happens is the reveal about Earl and the buying of the the stock.
You're right.
So that he owns the company.
Yeah. So he buys most of the stock of the company, so he has the majority share, so he's the owner again. And then also, of course, Morgan Freeman is promoted. There's a great "Didn't you get the memo?" line, which is great.
Yeah,
nice callback.
I do want to bring up though one problem I have with the end of the movie, going back to the train and then all the way, is they bring back probably half a dozen lines and turn them around. It's just too much.
There's a lot of
it's clever, but then when every scene does a new line, and just like you said on the train with the knowing your location, and then we have that with
mindful of your surroundings,
and actually there's two things in that scene, because there's didn't you get the memo, and there's also it's all a little bit complicated.
No, yeah,
right?
it's like through mutual funds, but the important thing is my company's future is secure. Like, because that's
there's definitely
there's just so many of them. It's like any one of them is fine. There's no problem with any one of them, but you do 5 of them in 10 minutes, and suddenly it's just like, okay.
I guess, and part of that also is the nature of just how we do so much cross cutting, and I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah. But anyway, so then we go to
so we're at the house, of course, and he brings back, even I'm going to bring it brick by brick, which is
we don't get the well scene. We don't get the well scene, which we didn't need.
Yeah.
I've lost my childhood's end. Whatever
in the script. So he's hammering up or closing up the well that he fell in as a kid, and then he has this kind of dialogue with Rachel, and it kind of sets up things that will happen in the Dark Knight of like, one day, if you're not Batman, then maybe we can do something. But until then, right now, Gotham needs you. Yeah, which is I think is a good little. It's a nice little bow on it, because it kind of adds a little tragedy to the character that he can't have both.
I do find it a little problematic that Bruce and Rachel's relationship has been not very romantic up the hints, and then he's like, "But I'll give it all up for you." Yeah, that's this thing that I just fought for years to do.
But it definitely also seems like every time he sees her in the script, it's enforced, but he has like this infatuation with her, like in his eyes, you can see it. Like when he first sees her at the hotel.
But going
he's
from
just,
that
like,
to I'll give up this life that I just created from nothing in this company.
It's tough. The moments are there. I mean, and I think the other important moment is when he runs into Rachel when he's leaving the restaurant with the 2 models or whatever. But I do agree too that at the end it just doesn't resonate quite as much as it could.
I almost just wish he had said something, not "I'll give it all up for you," but like maybe it could be different, or maybe like just been like even just saying like something that was a little looser, that like it doesn't have to be this way or something, rather than "I'll give it all up now."
One interesting thing for me would have been if he had said something to the effect of, "You're why I've become what I've become." You know, and there would be a
That
nice
would've been
irony
nice.
there, right?
Wow.
Why? Because then she's saying, "But I can't be with you if this is what you are," you know,
Yeah.
because
Wow.
you're needed. Because, right?
Yeah, that would have been
Yeah.
great. Like bring back some of those conversations that they had in the car when he was young.
But it makes
and-
sense. It's like, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, and she's the one who's taught him the difference between revenge and justice, right?
Yeah.
And that's really the thing that led him down the path that he
Right.
went on. So, yeah, if we had that at the end, that could be really powerful.
Yeah, no, that's great stuff. You clearly you see
Hollywood
me,
needs
you
to
see-
call me.
Yeah, you see
I-
me smiling here. First of all, we're getting,
Christopher Nolan, move out of the way.
it just tickles me. Like I've smiled multiple times, like listen to you talk that we're getting to do this about a Batman movie. So I'm just like, it's
I know
just
we
so
have it,
fun.
yeah.
It's so fun for
We're
me.
always doing these amazing, Godard movies, or
you know, like I love doing all that stuff, but like doing this kind of movie, it's just
Yeah.
fun for me. But
Yeah. And then the final scene.
the final scene,
Which
of
is
course, we have
I have to bring up one little
Sure.
nitpicky thing.
Alfred or anything.
Yeah, when Alfred says about fix it, though, we can.
Improvements to the foundation.
What I'm thinking is, who are you going to get to do that?
True.
Yeah.
It's
You're going to
always-
kill them after
Yeah.
they've reinforced the, like,
Sure.
this is the Batcave. I'm not really seeing,
Yeah.
ignore the car. I don't know,
Yeah,
like, what
there's
is
definitely.
I know. Yeah.
Well, interesting thing is if you look at the Dark Knight, it's like his Batcave is at least a section, or basically it's Wayne Tower, because it's the same place that he tests. I didn't notice this actually
Right.
until watching this one. It's the same place he tests the tumbler with
Sure.
Fox in.
Right.
And then in Dark Knight Rises it comes back, but even then it's not like a Bat movie Superman Batcave where it's just
Yeah.
obviously it's Batman. It feels more like platforms, and I think
You got to do a lot of work.
Yeah.
I think
And
it's
There's not much in there at the moment, so they
Sure.
they reinforce
Yeah.
and then they put the stuff. But it's just
Yeah.
kind of funny. It says
yeah,
that.
of course, yeah.
Can you just set that over here and we'll take care of it? We don't need any help.
You're a billionaire. You could probably get away with a few things.
That's true. I mean,
Yeah.
build some robot.
And then we of course have this great scene with Gordon and Batman cementing their long-standing
And
relationship.
really, this hasn't nothing to do with this movie, and more about just setting up.
It's all about setup, right?
Right, which is why it's the last scene
Yeah.
versus the previous scene should be the last scene,
Yeah.
but you're setting up the sequel, so then you got to put this
So
one last.
We learned that there's a bat signal now, and that Gordon's on Batman's side. And we also learned this great thing, a conversation about escalation, which is a big theme in Dark Knight. Actually, is escalation and,
Sure.
and how who gets to decide to play lawmaker, basically. But that, of course, leads into the Joker card. You're out here running a mask, and check this guy out also. And then, of course, there's the final line is, thank you for doing this. And he says, you'll never have to thank.
Yeah.
Which is really cool.
Right,
Great,
yeah.
cool moment. It's very heroic and also just badass sounding. When he does it, it's like
Yeah.
every time he'll say something cool, and like fucking jump off a building, and it's like
Right.
makes him 10 times cooler.
Yeah. And he always disappears right after he says something cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But no, I think that's all great stuff, and we're at a new equilibrium right at the end of the movie, and we've set up the new dynamic and the team essentially.
Yeah.
Gordon literally tells you how the world is different after Batman. He
Yeah.
says, "This is happening. This
Right.
is happening. This is happening,
And
and now this is
And
happening."
he literally tells you the themes of the Dark, some big themes in the
Yeah.
Dark Knight. Actually,
I hadn't thought about it, but there's also a nice parallel, when he jumps off the building and sort of flies away to the first time he shows up with Gordon and he holds the
It's on,
stapler
like, the
to
same
his
roof,
neck.
yeah.
And then when he runs off and Gordon chases him and he jumps across the buildings and he like slams into
Yeah,
the balcony.
yeah.
You know?
Yeah, you're
And
right,
it's
yeah.
it's very ungraceful and he's wearing the ski mask.
Yes.
So yeah, there's a nice parallel then to how
Yeah.
he departs.
yeah, you're
Um,
right. And it's
yeah.
it's a cool final shot and everything.
Yeah.
And like, you may want to talk about this later, but you mentioned something about with Casino Royale.
Yeah.
About how it's similar to Batman Begins, or are you talking about? Or are you talking about Skyfall to Dark Knight?
Well, I mean, so Batman Begins, I think, is very parallel to Casino Royale because again, we're sort of rebooting this character and we're setting up sort of a different approach to the franchise than we
Right.
had seen with
Yeah.
the last franchise. And then I think the parallel then too is just that in some ways. A lot of people look at Skyfall in the same way they look at The Dark Knight, which
Right.
is maybe the bigger, flashier, more superior movie in sort of public opinion. And when we get to Dark Knight, I'll talk about some other parallels I see with the villains of those two stories.
I won't lie. Like
but-
I'm so glad we did this, just breaking this down. But like to me, Batman Begins has always been like, I've always been like, do I like Dark Knight better or Batman Begins? It depends on which one I watch last, kind of.
Right.
But I feel like doing this, and then I can't wait to do Dark Knight, and then also Dark Knight Rises, just because it's gonna be cool to like see the structure of these movies and just kind of how successful they are. But I mean, overall, like Batman Begins, I think it's a great movie. Of course, there's some issues, I'm sure. You know, it's funny because I was watching it with my girlfriend last night, and she said in the first 12 minutes, she was like, this movie is just like, it's just all over the place and everything. And I was just like, shut up. You know, that's what I wanted to say. I didn't say that, but
he wanted to, Katie.
Yeah,
he did want to.
And, but you know, so I think it's great. And I think it works on a movie level, especially for at the time, a superhero film that really hadn't done anything like this.
No, there's something you mentioned, Bruce, you know, about even that small leap in logic about who's going to expand the Batcave.
Right.
I think this movie is obviously the one that it grounds Batman so hard to our reality, or just very closely to, but then we start getting even like that, this small logic jump that doesn't quite make sense with how realistic the rest of the world is. And I do feel like those get bigger as the more movies
It's
go
interesting. That's an interesting
I feel
point.
like Dark Knight really pulls it back down, and then Dark Knight Rises just completely blows it out of the water.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is interesting, but one of the things I had. The thing about,
that's all right. We're
it's
almost
okay.
done.
We got moodier. It's what happens
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah. I'm just now silhouetted, which I prefer.
It looks good.
And so we're wrapping it up. But I would say that Batman Begins is the most comic booky of the three movies, and that to me that's largely the setting. Gotham feels less like a real city in this movie.
Absolutely.
With Wayne Tower in the middle and the Narrows, it definitely feels a little bit more like a comic book version. It's still more grounded than any other Batman or superhero movie we'd seen, but the movie moves in that direction, right? So then, you know, just real quick preview, we get to The Dark Knight, kind of feels like Chicago, but Gotham still, you know, it's... And then by the third one, we're in Pittsburgh. It's clearly Pittsburgh, right?
Right. Well, we talked about this earlier today about like how you have these slums and like the tarps kind of connecting structures and like the downtrodden areas, and then Chicago. And then you're right. They were even shot. They want to be like reminiscent of Chicago and Dark Knight, where it's like just tall, beautiful, skyscrapers. Totally different feel, and we kind of argued like, how do they explain that? And we're like, well, maybe Batman kind of cleaned up part of the city, or that he's venturing out to different parts of Gotham.
Right.
That's kind of
the problem is Wayne Tower, because Wayne Tower's in two different places, basically, even on that logic. Yeah.
Well, and I think with Batman Begins, there was a sense of still trying to tie it to a little bit the original Batman movies and a little sense more of the
more
comic
gothic.
book and exactly. It's a little more gothic and the Narrows are much darker and
I
creepier.
think that even works just with the villain, like Scarecrow being this, and it obviously works with like the plot of like releasing this gas and people going like and turning into like crazed mobs.
Yeah.
But like those moments when we are in the Narrows, when Scarecrow's on his horse, when Rachel's running around trying to save the kid, when Gordon's out, it's really creepy.
Yeah.
Like it's a creepy place, and I think that plays in really well to what the story's doing. I think if you had that happen in Chicago, Gotham, it would have been like much different.
I love the hallucinations they have.
Yeah,
by
cool.
the way,
Really
whether
cool.
it's when they see Scarecrow or when they see Batman, I think it's great.
Yeah, it's a great play on it.
Listen, I know all the love. I love Heath Ledger. I love the Joker, but man, Crane. I'm blanking on the actor's name. He's a much bigger deal, honestly. Now, I love his performance as Crane. I love for one. I love just like his like the way he like plays the Doctor version of himself. It's very clean cut and precise, but also very nefarious and evil underneath. You can totally tell. And then just when he goes insane and when he puts the I don't know. There's just something about his Scarecrow that I've always found incredibly interesting as a villain.
Yeah.
Well, he's just he you know, classically Batman's villains represent a piece of Batman, right? A good villain does, and Scarecrow obviously represents this character that deals with fear, and it's a big thing with Batman. Fun facts for viewers: if you are interested in an alternate timeline, there is test footage out there of Cillian Murphy, is his name, just popped in my head.
That's right, yeah.
Of him as testing as Bruce Wayne Batman.
Yeah,
oh, wow.
There's screen tests.
It's like the cinematography and everything, and he's doing the lines. That
Do they have
Christian
him in
does.
Val Kilmer suit too?
They do have him in the Val Kilmer suit from Batman Forever. Yeah, they have.
But I
at
think
one
he
point.
does a couple scenes that's not
Yeah,
Batman.
he does some as Bruce, some as
Batsuit.
Batman.
Yeah.
There's 3 people. There's Christian and the guy, and there's Cillian Murphy doing it.
Yeah, I do
And-
know. I have seen the Christian Bale test footage of him in the Val Kilmer suit.
Yeah, yeah.
and that's funny.
It's cool.
It just like that rigid neck thing.
Honestly, it still looks
Yeah.
cool. Honestly, I mean, even in that suit, it looks pretty cool. But that's
Yeah.
just my opinion. I just one thing last thing I want to ask you, Bruce, before we wrap this up, is that now that you've went through this kind of deep dive, and same thing for you, Daniel, and we'll find out more as we go through the other 2 movies. But is Batman Begins still, you think, possibly your favorite so far after doing this?
I don't know if it is. I think what makes it special is it's an origin story, and it's a really well done origin story. You know, the other movie that I kind of compare it to, it's completely different but sort of similar, is the first Harry Potter. Because even though the first Harry Potter may not be as good as some of the later Harry Potters, there's something really special about it because it's the first one, and it really sets up the world and pulls you into the world, and you want to be in that world.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I'd say about Batman Begins. I think probably in the end the scale isn't as big. It may not be executed quite as well. I think the themes, again, are problematic in a lot of them, but maybe the most problematic here because they don't really factor into the character as well. But you know, especially in a lot of ways, the middle, as we see Bruce trying to figure this out, as we see him find all this stuff, it's just a lot of fun. You know, it's a lot of fun to see all that. You know, one thing I was surprised at how easy the climax was. I had remembered it being longer, but it's really quick. He gets on the train and then he just defeats him really quickly, you know, and it's not that hard. So I kind of noticed some flaws I hadn't before, but I still think that the origin aspects are handled very well, even if there are some other flaws. And it makes it a lot of fun.
Yeah, that would be an interesting list of like the best origin story movies, like the best movies that have done an origin story, right? And what about makes a good origin story? That was interesting to me. Sorry.
No, it's
Sidebar.
No, we might do that list someday. Definitely, that would probably be my top 5. Batman Begins of origin stories,
sure,
or maybe top 2 or 1. What do you think, Daniel? Still think it's your favorite one out of the 3?
It's hard to know. The other good thing about this, you know, what we're doing is I haven't watched these movies in probably at least 5 years, at least since I've seen any of them, probably, and so I feel kind of fresh right now. Like I'm like. You know, my memory on the Dark Knight's kind of fuzzy, and Dark Knight Rises is especially fuzzy. So I'm like, you know, it's that thing where we go through all the problems, and I'm like, yeah, that is a problem, man. That is an issue. You know what I mean? Like you mentioned, like, you know, Ra's al Ghul is a quick fight, which is probably good since he didn't really have to learn anything to beat him. You know what I mean? You need to do it quick if it's not going to be thematic. But yeah, I think I'm like, yeah, that is good. I think it is maybe that first half of the movie is so good. The exposition, the flashbacks, the building up to be Batman, and even up to even Crane, like all of that is so. Because his dealings with Crane are much more thematic than anything he does with Ra's al Ghul at the end. It's just so tight and enjoyable that I still feel like. It's weird because we have 3 movies to rank these between. It's at least 1 or 2.
We're gonna have to ask this question again at the end.
Sure, yeah. I just kind of wanted to touch base because I wanted to revisit this, even the next movie, and then of course the third. I feel like we all kind of probably agree the third one's probably the weakest of the 3 movies. But maybe not. Though.
I mean, who knows? Maybe we'll break it down and find out.
Yeah,
it's the best.
there's a lot I like about the third one. I just have some issues with it. Like I think like a lot of people.
Yeah.
But no,
I think tomorrow. I'm really looking forward to next week's discussion. Which one of these 2 is stronger? Because I think that's really the most interesting, kind of comparison.
Yeah, and because like it just seems like it's universal that everyone likes Dark Knight, but I feel like they just haven't. They've made good points, but they haven't broke it down. I've never broke down Batman Begins like this before.
I mean, the big point.
And so
anyone that argues that, I feel like their only argument is Heath Ledger because they don't care to. And to be fair, hell of an argument. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, fair.
Well, I want to ask. Well, by the time to like next week, I want to ask 2 questions. One, is it a better movie? And the other one is it a better Batman? Is it a better movie about Batman, or is it just a better movie?
Yeah.
So
I just want to throw this out for viewers. You can find these scripts online for cheap or free.
Yeah, for free.
So we didn't mention it last week, but can we link like a place to find the script? Is there a legal place to find the script for free?
Don't know.
Okay. We're going to encourage you to use the internet and find the script
I'm pretty sure
for whatever price you feel comfortable paying.
you can buy all 3 scripts in like a booklet form for like $10 on Amazon, or you can go. I think I found these on knowfilmschool.com. So
Cool.
I think they're on there.
So if you want to read along with us, because I think you're going to get a lot more
But
out
also,
of this.
these were
reading
all
these scripts.
nominated for multiple Academy Awards, even this one. So like typically, if it's nominated for one Academy Award, they kind of release.
Was it
the
best
script.
original?
Not I don't know for script, but it was nominated for best cinematography.
Oh, okay,
and best-
okay, the
stuff
movie
like
was,
that.
sure.
Yeah, I
Sometimes-
wouldn't worry too much about the legality of the
Yeah.
scripts
Yeah.
online. I mean, they're
Read
all
the
on there.
scripts.
No one's worrying about
Yeah.
it. So
Final thing: is there anything we want to talk about that we didn't get to address before we close out the episode? I feel like we kind of hit everything for the most part.
Yeah. It was a good nuance,
Anything we
complex
missed,
discussion.
Bruce?
yeah, not anything that we missed, but just I still wish that internal goal thing had been stronger in the
Yeah.
movie. And I think as we get to this question that you brought up of sort of what's the best movie, part of it is like how big the flaws are,
Yeah.
because you have what's good about the movie and then you got what's bad about the movie, right? And it's sort of like, okay, maybe the movie's this good, but this much bad
Brings it down, yeah.
and pulls my mask off too.
That's how good it is.
You're about to find out his real identity.
So I'll tell you right off the front, I think what I'm going to think is that The Dark Knight has more good stuff than Batman Begins. My question is going to be, does it have more bad stuff that's going to pull the good down
Yeah.
to make it, then comparison to Batman Begins? I don't know what I'm going to think I that. But
Yeah, me neither. Me
I'm
neither.
excited. I think it's gonna be fun. I enjoyed reading this, and then of course I enjoyed even more
Yeah.
talking to you guys about it.
Yeah.
Daniel, where can our listeners write into us?
They can write into bit.ly/241mail. You'll see a beautiful little graphic at the bottom of your screen.
Can you say that more slowly? I don't think I would have picked that up if I was listening.
No. Rewind it and play it back half speed. I don't care.
It's also going to be in beautiful letters.
bit.ly/241mail. There you can write in. You can tell us
There we go.
why we're wrong, why we're right, all the things that we missed and didn't miss about Batman, and just general things you want to say.
Yeah, and of course, for more Podcast 241, go to podcast241.com and follow us on all of our social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We don't do Snapchat, but we do TikTok. So there you go.
Awesome.
We do, we do TikTok.
We
posted
do.
some old videos.
Hey, we got a couple subscribers on TikTok.
That's true. We actually have surprise. I remember when you posted those, I was like, wow, why are we getting so many views? It's like, who cares about this podcast on TikTok?
Yeah, we got a
Hey,
lot. Bruce, is there any way that our viewers can follow you or
You probably don't want them to
react
but
to you on Twitter? or
What's your
anything like
street
that?
address? Where do you usually frequent, like on Sunday mornings?
I actually am on Instagram and on Twitter as at BDHutch.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you're in the
Hutch.
Arkansas area and you want a film degree, also a good guy to talk to.
Yeah.
Or
Exactly.
in the the southern area. Hell, if you're in LA and you want a real film school experience, I'm just saying.
Well, guys, I appreciate y'all being here. It was fun. We'll be
Yeah.
back next week talking The Dark Knight, and I'm looking very much forward to that. Bruce, thank you so much
Can't
for being
wait. It's
here.
been awesome. Thanks for
Yeah.
having
It's been
me.
really
Yeah.
fun.
Back
yeah.
in script
So-
analysis, baby.
Yeah.
I know. So my name is Thompson,
I'm Daniel Wingfield.
And I'm Bruce Hutchinson.
and we have spoken.